Hey, 42 here. If you've ever watched Lord of the Rings and found yourself strangely reminded of Harry Potter, you either have a thing for wizards, or you've unwittingly cottoned on to the fact that they're basically the same story. Frodo Baggins and Harry Potter both start out living stable but unfulfilling lives. Then each finds himself on a sudden and unexpected journey full of adventure, peril, and challenges. After overcoming numerous obstacles, both characters have to win one final battle that tests their resolve before they return to real life, forever changed by their experiences. If you've been living at the bottom of a well and you don't know who Harry Potter or Frodo Baggins are, don't worry. This same story pattern appears in a genuinely staggering number of books, films, TV shows, and even computer games. You could say that it's the story within all stories, a basic template you already know backwards because you've seen it 1,000 times before. In fact, this story structure is so ubiquitous, some people believe it's literally hardwired into our brains. But more on that later. As well as popular culture, this narrative structure is repeated across myths, legends, and stories from across the world and throughout time. And we know about it, mainly thanks to a guy called Joseph Campbell. Campbell was a professor of literature and one of the world's leading experts on mythology. After studying thousands of stories and tales from all over the world, he noticed a recurring theme that went a little something like this. A hero goes on an adventure, meets challenges and learns lessons, uses those lessons to win a major victory and claim some form of reward, then returns home with said reward forever transformed. Campbell calls this the monomyth, or, as it's become more commonly known, the hero's journey. According to Campbell, the hero's journey can be broken into 3 main parts. In stage 1, the departure, the hero lives in the ordinary world, comfortable enough, but generally unsatisfied. Something's missing from his life, or he has a sense that something needs to change, but he doesn't know what. But then, he receives a call to adventure. Something in his life changes and he has to decide what to do about it. Often, the hero refuses the call at first and tries to hold on to the safety of his comfortable world. But then someone, usually a mentor or wise person of some sort, helps him to see the need to change and convinces him to follow that call to adventure. At this point, the hero makes the decision to go ahead, what Campbell calls crossing the threshold, and the journey begins. In The Matrix, Neo is a computer programmer by day and hacker by night. He hates his job and feels a general dissatisfaction with the world that he can't quite put his finger on. He's searching for something. Then, he receives a message on his computer to follow the white rabbit. This is his call to adventure. He meets Trinity, and she tells him about the Matrix. But when the time comes to escape from the agents and join Morpheus, Neo loses faith and gives up. He refuses the call. Later, he meets Morpheus, the wise mentor, in person. It's Morpheus who convinces him the story about the Matrix is true through the cunning use of vibrant coloured pills. At the start of The Lord of the Rings, we meet Frodo, living a peaceful life in the Shire. But things change unexpectedly when he inherits his uncle Bilbo Baggins' possessions, including a mysterious ring. Gandalf discovers that the ring is, in fact, the One Ring, fashioned by the Dark Lord Sauron, and he tells Frodo to leave the Shire and take the ring to the elves in Rivendell. This is Frodo's call to adventure. But initially, he says no. He's never left the Shire before, and he's afraid. He refuses the call. Eventually, Gandalf, his wise mentor, convinces him he's the only person who can complete the quest, and Frodo eventually accepts. Of course, by the time he meets his first orc, he's cursing wizards and their seductive beards. But that's all part of the journey. Specifically, Stage 2, the initiation. In the initiation stage, the hero is totally outside his comfort zone. He's basically in a whole new world, which Campbell called the special world because everything feels different, perhaps even alien. The hero faces a series of tasks and challenges that become increasingly difficult. He often has some small wins, but also gets knocked back. So he's forced to learn lessons both about the world and himself. In movies, you often know the hero's entered the initiation stage because you're suddenly watching some kind of montage of him training or doing karate kicks on top of wooden posts on the beach at sunset. Eventually, the hero meets a major challenge, or has to fight an enemy who would have been beyond his abilities at the start of the journey. But with the lessons he's learned, he's able to win the battle and claim the prize. That prize could be something physical, like a treasure, but more often it's some kind of new understanding or wisdom that makes the hero a more complete person. In Harry Potter, the initiation stage is basically everything that happens after we get to Hogwarts, and before Harry fights he who must not be named. In Star Wars, this stage starts when Luke leaves his home and enters the spaceport of Mos Eisley with Obi-Wan Kenobi, and ends once Luke has destroyed the Death Star. Of course, it also includes the part where Luke has the hots for his sister, but that bit's fairly unique. The final stage of the hero journey is the return. The hero has accomplished something extraordinary, and it's time for him to get back to reality, taking his reward with him. As he re-enters normal life, he realizes how much his experiences have changed him, and he sees life and himself in a completely new way. Sometimes the hero has changed so much, he's unable to return to the life he once lived. Like in Lord of the Rings, when Frodo finds himself unable to settle back into life at the Shire. But other times, the hero has found what was missing at the start of the story, and rejoins the world as a happier, more complete person. Like in The Matrix, when Neo fulfilled the prophecy, found love with a woman who wears lots of leather, and becomes about as cool as it's possible for a human being to be whilst wearing a trench coat. Joseph Campbell published his ideas about the hero's journey in his 1949 book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, which has been popular in American literary studies and writing programs since at least the 70s. George Lucas, for example, used the hero's journey as the foundation for Star Wars, and Hollywood screenwriting guru Christopher Vogler used it to put together his best-selling Bible for scriptwriters, The Writer's Journey. But Joseph Campbell and his books aren't the reason the hero journey is found in almost every story you know. After all, Tolkien started writing Lord of the Rings before The Hero with 1,000 Faces was even published. A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens was published in 1843. The epic poem, The Odyssey, basically the definition of the hero's journey, goes back thousands of years. In fact, the monomyth structure shows up in stories as far back as we have stories, maybe even before Yoda was born. What Campbell and his fellow researchers discovered was that stories with almost identical themes and symbols have popped up all over the world in totally different cultures, separated by different languages, distance, and time. Campbell believed this is because the hero's journey is common to all people, a part of the human psyche that's built into our minds from birth. Like legendary Swiss psychologist Carl Jung, who was also deeply interested in the symbolism of human stories, Campbell believed the hero's journey emerged from a kind of collective unconscious. We all have a personal unconscious that's made up of our beliefs, assumptions, and biases that's largely responsible for the way we behave and the decisions we make. But Jung believed we also have a collective unconscious that contains cognitive structures that have evolved in our species over the course of human history. If the stuff in our personal unconscious is partly what defines us as individuals, our collective unconscious is partly what defines us as human. And Campbell believed this is where the hero journey lives. It's what Jung and Campbell called an archetype, a type of psychological structure that we're essentially born with. We can't examine these archetypes consciously, but since they're a part of who we are at a fundamental level, we can't help but express them, which is why they keep showing up in human stories, myths, and legends. Stories are a fundamental part of our universal human culture, and they're often used as a tool to teach important lessons and ideas. Jung believed telling stories gives us an avenue to explore some of the darker corners of our unconscious minds, allowing us to confront our fears or deal with trauma. The hero's journey essentially tells the story of this process. It uses metaphor to describe how a person, the hero in his own story, realizes that something's wrong with his life. Perhaps he's unhappy in a relationship. Maybe he's lost his job or is facing serious illness. We all come up against these kinds of challenges sooner or later. These calls to adventure, if you like. Most of the time, we don't want to change, at least not at first. Change is difficult and scary, so we refuse the call. But eventually, we're convinced that something needs to shift. So we make the commitment and cross the threshold. In stories, the hero at this point usually enters a forest or heads out to sea or ventures into the mountains. It's all unknown territory that feels full of danger. In real life, this usually involves doing something new and challenging. It could be just joining a gym and starting exercise. It could be looking for a new job or learning a new skill. Whatever it is, we go through multiple trials and challenges that test our commitment. Eventually, though, there's one final test where we face our demons, or what Campbell called our dragons, and confront what's been holding us back or sabotaging us in work or life. If we manage to slay our dragon, whatever form it takes, we claim the reward, which is a greater understanding of ourselves and who we need to be fitter, happier, and more productive. Finally comes the return, where we take this newfound understanding of ourselves and turn it into action that makes a difference in our life. This can be even more difficult than the ordeal itself, but doing this successfully is what brings us to the end of our hero's journey. We may not have crawled through Mordor and thrown a ring into the heart of Mount Doom, but we did discover something new about ourselves and what makes us tick. Campbell believed that every person can go through many of these hero journeys in their lifetimes, each time understanding themselves a little better and becoming more committed to their own happiness. It's what he called following your bliss, and he suggested that everyone can find at least one example in their lives of a time when they had to change to overcome adversity and learn something new about themselves in the process. Campbell's theories haven't been popular with everyone. Some folklorists, apparently that's a real job, believe Campbell wasn't scientific enough in his research and that confirmation bias led him to choose stories that naturally conformed to his thinking. And of course, they may be right, but the next time you spend a night binging on Netflix, watch out for the classic hero's journey pattern. It might just be that Joseph Campbell was onto something. Thanks for watching. Good news, you can now pre-order my new book, Bread and Circuses, What Did the Romans Ever Do for Us? It's a wild and witty journey for 1,000 years of unexpected Roman history, told in a refreshing way and packed full of incredible and unbelievable stories. Copies are selling out fast, so pre-order yours today to lock it in. Thank you.